Also feelings of well-being, staving off depression, things of that sort. The dopamine system is linked to so many important aspects of life, far too many than we could discuss right now. And we have those previous episodes in which we do discuss all of that material. Nonetheless, it is important to understand that dopamine is the molecule of motivation and to some extent reward, but really motivation. And that if you want to maintain consistent motivation during, say, your individual bouts of work toward your goals and from one bout to the next, so not just within a session, but from day to day, across sessions, and from week to week, and indeed from 12-week cycle to 12-week cycle, if that's required, and from one goal that you set to the next goal that you define and decide to pursue, you want to understand this particular feature of dopamine, which is that, yes, dopamine and its release is highly valuable toward getting more motivated and feeling more motivated, but that it has certain properties related to things like dopamine reward prediction error, baselines of dopamine, etc., that make it the case that if you reward yourself every time you reach a milestone, say you finish out an hour or 2 hours of work, so you treat yourself to something, you reward yourself, that you are going to diminish both the potency of that reward and you're going to reduce your motivation over time. That might be surprising to you, but if you were to watch those episodes, it would all become clear as to why that is the case. It is also true that if you were to only reward yourself when you accomplish your goal, or perhaps more commonly, if you look at the accomplishment of your goal as the only reward in the whole process of goal pursuit and achievement, that is going to undermine your probability of success as well. Rather, the best way to incorporate the mechanics of the dopamine system such that you can achieve not just immediate motivation, but ongoing motivation is to incorporate what is referred to as random intermittent reinforcement, which is what the casinos use to keep people playing. And it simply means randomly reward yourself and randomly don't reward yourself for successful completion of milestones. Those milestones could be within a bout of effort, or it could be across bouts of effort. So let's say you set out at the beginning on your piece of paper to basically, let's say, run or practice at some cognitive endeavor 4 hours total per week, and you're going to do that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Should you reward yourself at the end of each session? Should you reward yourself at the end of each week? The answer is it depends, and it should depend in a random intermittent way. So the simplest way to do this is whenever you complete a milestone, could be at the end of a day, you did your 1 hour, whatever it was that you designated you were going to do on that particular day. Should you reward yourself cognitively or with some physical thing? I don't know what that physical thing might be, but it could be a meal, could be a movie, could be something that you enjoy. Well, the answer is you should flip a coin, and if it's heads, yes, reward yourself. And if it's tails, don't. It's that simple. It is that simple. It should be 50-50 probability, and it's random as to whether or not you reward yourself. Now, with physical rewards, like monetary rewards or food rewards or a movie or participating in something else that you enjoy, it's a bit easier to define. The cognitive rewarding of one's own efforts is something that people really struggle to comprehend. But what I'm not referring to when I say cognitive rewards is I'm not referring to saying, yes, I'm the best, and really trying to shower yourself with internal praise and tell yourself that you're the greatest thing that ever happened simply because you performed this learning bout. What I'm simply referring to is the kind of internal dopamine reward that comes from telling yourself, yes, I'm making progress. I'm making progress. I'm on the path. I'm able to set a goal and achieve a goal, which might seem like a healthy thing to do psychologically. And in fact, it is. It's great. And I think it's really important that people be able to self-reward themselves, especially self-reward for verbs that put them in a more adaptive stance in life, that enhance their mental health, physical health, and performance. And that, of course, also includes relationships. We're not just talking about solitary pursuits here. We're talking about pursuits that bring us into the world, that allow us to lean into life with more vigor and with more effectiveness, not just to help ourselves, but to help others. So what I'm referring to is completing something and internally patting yourself on the back for having completed that thing. That is a good thing to do, but if you want to maintain ongoing motivation, you're not going to do that every time. You're not going to punish yourself, but rather you finish out a bout of learning, you flip the coin. let's say it lands tails on that day, you simply shift into the next thing you need to do that day. Now, it is not easy to suppress thoughts. We know this. It's very hard to suppress negative thoughts, but it's still hard to suppress positive thoughts. So internally, if you're glowing from the fact that you performed well, don't try and suppress that. That's okay. But if you flip a tails, then you don't want to actively engage in a self-reward process. However, if you flip the coin and it's heads, well, then you should absolutely engage in a self-reward process. And that process should consist of 30 to 60 seconds of closing your eyes. Well, you don't have to. It works better if you close your eyes. And simply thinking about the fact that, yes, you can set a goal. You can engage in the specific set of questions. Do I want to do this practice today? Do I not want to do this practice today? And then the specific set of actions, maybe they involve visual focus and the other tools we talked about, turning off of your phone, etc. You are somebody who can get things done. You are somebody that is moving forward toward your particular goal. And so you just sort of create a little bit of a positive cognitive loop around that ability that you are in fact building up. And that's something that people often overlook, which is that not only is moving toward a goal great because it establishes more robustness in the neural circuits that allow us to perform that thing, right? I mean, after all, that's what learning is. Eventually, you don't achieve the same frustration and errors that you do when trying to perform that thing. Eventually, you learn how to play the piano. You learn how to speak conversational French. You run that sub 6-minute mile. But also the neural circuits associated with self-generated motivation and with the tools that we're talking about themselves are subject to neuroplasticity. So those become more robust, and that's fantastic because when you eventually reach one goal, I would hope that you would then update and set out to achieve another goal, and you will find that over time, you will be more effective in achieving other goals by virtue of the work that you did in pursuing a previous goal, because ultimately it's really about defining goals and then learning how to quantify the actions required and then engaging in those actions. So there's the specific circuits involved in generating those actions, which are very goal specific. And then there are the circuits. Which circuits are we talking about? We're talking about that amygdala, the lateral prefrontal cortex, the orbital frontal cortex, and the basal ganglia we talked about earlier that have been built up, that have been reinforced because, as I mentioned, there is one universal circuit for goal pursuit and achievement. So random intermittent reinforcement is the key. And while I spent a good amount of time talking about self-generated cognitive reinforcement, this also applies to any kind of physical rewards. The movie that you're going to reward yourself with, the ice cream cone, the whatever that you're going to reward yourself with. Perhaps it's monetary, perhaps it's food, perhaps it's social. Random intermittent rewards are the ones that are going to keep you motivated and are going to best increase the probability of success, not just within a given bout of learning, not just day to day, not just week to week, not just quarter to quarter, but across the lifetime. An important protocol to incorporate in your goal pursuits is one that I learned from Dr. Maya Shankar when she was a guest on the Huberman Lab podcast. And she talked about the so-called middle problem. The middle problem is the fact that people tend to have a lot of motivation at the outset of pursuing a goal, although you now know that sometimes, or some people don't have a lot of motivation when pursuing their goal at the start, so they need to think about failures and how terrible everything will be, and then they will certainly have motivation. It's going to be a fear-based motivation. But in general, people tend to have more motivation at the start of pursuing a goal and at the end when they get close to or they start to perceive the finish line. But that most people experience the so-called middle problem, where in the middle of a learning bout or in the middle of the week or in the middle of a 12-week cycle, they are less motivated. And this has actually been quantified in numerous studies. And there are several ways to overcome the middle problem. The simplest one is to acknowledge it, to recognize that it's coming. And so when it does come and you're experiencing lower levels of motivation, perhaps even increased failure rates, and you're not performing as well, you're getting frustrated, to know that that's a natural process that everybody experiences. And just knowing that can sometimes allow people to move through that to the place where then they can sense the end of the learning bout, or they can sense that they're making some progress, the finish line is there, and then they get that increase in motivation again. However, sometimes the middle problem is such a problem that people need some tools to move through it. And the best way to move through the middle problem, or in fact to eliminate it, is actually to make the middle of a learning bout its own separate thing that you acknowledge the presence of and that you break up, but into 3 separate bouts. So here we're talking about carving up the 1 hour learning bout or the 2 hour learning bout into an initial phase where you either have naturally occurring motivation or you use fear-based visualization to increase your motivation. You lean into that, and then let's assume it's a 1 hour learning bout, and then at about the 25-minute mark, you start to experience lower levels of focus. Perhaps then you use the visual target protocol, but then you go back into your bout of learning and you're not feeling very motivated. It's hard. Your mind is drifting. You want to pick up your phone. You want to do other things. You find yourself doing other things. That's the period of time to take, say, the 25-minute to 45-minute period within the session and divide it into perhaps 3 or even 4 smaller chunks of time. And you perhaps have heard of chunking before. Chunking is simply breaking something down into smaller chunks that are more achievable. It's simply what we're talking about here. But really chunking up that middle section of a learning bout can be very effective at essentially eliminating the middle problem. Now, for those of you that are going to be really nitpicky, you'll say, wait, you take that 20 minutes from the 25-minute mark to the 45-minute mark within your hour learning bout, and you divide it up into 4 little chunks. And in those 2 middle chunks, I'm going to feel the middle problem for those 2 middle chunks. Well, that's not actually the way it pans out. Fortunately, when you break things down into small enough chunks, you eliminate the middle problem and you experience sustained motivation. Now, the extreme interpretation of that would have you measuring every minute or even every second of a learning bout and having consistent motivation throughout that. Because, for instance, if you can concentrate for 10 seconds, why wouldn't you simply be able to just mark off 10-second increments? Well, at some point, the marking off or the monitoring of those increments is going to be distracting toward the thing that you actually want to do. So the simple thing to do is to acknowledge the middle problem, right? The fact that we have more motivation at the start and at the end of our goal pursuit sessions than we do within the middle, and then to simply chunk that middle section into 3, maybe 4 smaller chunks. And if you need to incorporate things like the visual target protocol 1 or 3 or perhaps even 8 times within that middle section, so be it. It's going to help you move through with better focus and better motivation. And what I just described can, of course, be applied to the longer bouts of effort that don't occur just during one learning bout, but perhaps across the week. So for instance, if you are doing 4 days a week of language learning or fitness training, so maybe it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday type of schedule,